All right. I don't have very many slides. I'm not a PowerPoint guy. These are going to be really simple. I don't get a big kick out of sitting back, watching something, and then going to sleep, which is about time for that, isn't it? Happy hour is only an hour away. Damn, you're dead already. What is this? Okay, there we go. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Why would you want to put livestock? How many of you have livestock? Okay, well then this is not for you. How many of you don't have livestock and want it? And want livestock? Well, that's not very many. We're not talking to very many people. How many of you have livestock or don't have livestock and don't want livestock? Okay. All right, we have some of those. Well, they can add, you've already heard. I can't tell you anything you don't already know. They can add to, you know, the benefit of your organic farm if you manage it properly. Who's interested in poultry? Well, okay, sorry. You can ask a question. How about pork? Okay, a little more. How about beef? Okay, more beef. Okay, and dairy? Well, I'm not going to get into dairy. Jiminy Christmas.
I don't have to milk them.
Yeah, that's the key. See, the last time I messed with dairy, I was a kid, and I hated milking cows. Sheep, goats. Okay, so we have a cross section. All right, we'll try to. This is for you to think about. I'm not going to give you any answers or any procedures, just considerations. What's the outcome you want to achieve? What are you after? All sustainability is local. You know your farm. You know it better than anybody else. I can't tell you what you should do. I'm not walking on your farm. People call me up and ask me for advice. What should I do about this crop or that crop? Man, that's hard to give because I don't see the place. I don't know what it looks like. They can describe something to me. So you go through your own process of thinking about what you have and what you want and what you're trying to achieve. But you can be very cynical. If you don't have livestock, it's going to change your life. It'll get you up in the morning. It'll bring you home at night. 365 days a year. Now that includes weekends. What's that say?
Placing the farm on ground.
How many of you are thinking about incorporating livestock because you have marginal land that you are farming now that maybe you shouldn't, and you put it in a grass crop and you think you'll get more benefit out of it? Is that a thought process? Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of that in northern Illinois. There's a lot of it in different parts of every state. Southern Illinois has a lot of it. We're farming a lot of ground that doesn't need to be farmed. As I was driving up here yesterday, it was about 286 miles. I did not see one field of green. Not one. Not one. Now, to some operators' credit, there were some fields untilled, but not many. I was at Practical Farmers of Iowa last week. That was a 400-mile trip from my house, all on interstate, and all those interstates, all 4-lane highway, all the way. I live on Highway 51, by the way, and the 4-lane ends 2 miles south of my house. 400 miles, one field of green. The interstates, you know, cuts through everybody's field. You're on the backside of the farm. So you're seeing some of the prime farmland, one field of green. We're way behind, folks. way behind where we need to be to regenerate this soil. If regeneration and soil health is what we're really looking for, we probably need livestock as a component within the system. Think of it as being complementary if it really is not basically the basic enterprise. Now, if it's a grass-based dairy, that's something entirely different. But every other part of it can be considered complementary. If it's not complementary, maybe you're getting into something you can't handle. Think about it. How many of you want to just satisfy a market? Do you have someplace to go with this livestock? Because if you're just doing it to build soil, what are you going to do with the product? So we'll have to think through the process, okay? Species, you know, we run through them. Choose. You have water, you have food, containment, you got to build fence. Think about the comfort level of the animal. If they're not happy, it's not going to work well. Now that sounds kind of strange, but if you got cows that you can manage, you have sheep that can be herded, if you have chickens that kind of know when you're going to move them, if you're working with pastures and you have, excuse me, it's how far to happy hour? There's the water. If you don't, where was I? What was my thought process? Happy, that's it, that's it. I'm looking for happy. What am I hearing? No, I'm hearing is somebody in that? Everybody needs an escape route. I'm just checking the place out. Okay. If you're working with rotational pastures, I'll guarantee you those cattle are looking for you to come out there and give them fresh grass. They're easy to move. That's easy to handle. Those are happy cows. They can also be unhappy. Are you pretty good at handling livestock? Because they take on your personality. Over time, livestock take on your personality. Haven't you watched these New York dog shows? Have you ever watched one of these New York dog shows or a fancy dog show? You see these people prance around with these dogs and the dog looks just like the owner, or vice versa. And I always love it when the bulldogs come on. This is pretty simple. If you're a starter, don't start big. I don't care whether it's poultry or what it is, don't start too big. Don't get buried into something you might not be used to or understand. This is my son's operation, or part of it, at Sun Prairie. Now that's, what, 20 minutes from here or 30 minutes from here? Just outside of Sun Prairie. He decided he wanted to raise pasture pork. Now he's got a star system. You can see some fencing there, but that's basic. Is there anything in that besides water?
Afraid not.
No, Ken, thank you. I appreciate it. He disappointed me. Well, I can't wait to happy hour either. What do we have here? Water, feed. Now pork, I mean, really, you really don't pasture pork. You just put them on pasture because they don't gain a lot on pasture. They can if they can get some truffles under a little bit of timber or something like that, or eat grubs. Now they're the one animal that, well, there are two, but they're the one animal that can really do major tillage. And if you want it, and Joel Salatin will tell you this, You know, he'll tell you that if you want to tear up a field or you want to put a row crop in it, let the porkers do it. And they can, and they will. If you're trying to maintain a pasture, then you have to make up a decision of how much you're going to give them. Are you going to ring them? Some folks don't like to do that. I never liked ringing hogs when we had them. I never did like that. God, that's a squealing thing. Decibels somewhere around 200. This is where Temple Grandin meets Sanford and Son. What do you see?
Low budget.
Yeah, really, really low budget.
They used their head.
That's right. Pallets didn't cost anything. Gates did. Check the trailer there in the back. I mean, this is classy. Red Fox would be proud of that. I mean, these are, but you do, this is handling. This is handling. Because if you're going to raise them, you got to get them to market. You got to get them to the kill floor somewhere, somehow, sometime. They don't just jump in the trailer. Put this picture in here. This was a regular row crop field. We row cropped it for all my life until a few years ago, and there's maybe 1.5% to 2% slope, not that big a deal. It has one terrace and it's an 80-acre field, but this is the edge of it. And I took this picture just for the heck of it. We use Murray Greys, by the way, and they're came from basically an old Angus herd, and we just started using Murray Grey bulls after we outcrossed for about 15 years from, let's see, there was Gelbvieh, there was Belgian Blue, there was, of course, Black Angus, there was Black Simmental, there was, what else? Oh yeah, Pulled Hereford. No, I didn't have any keys. I wasn't that stupid. Let's see. Anyway, there were probably 2 or 3 others, maybe a Charolais thrown in there. And when you, in the beef industry, when you keep outcrossing, which, you know, everybody said we should do to get better cattle, you get a maternalistic kind of a breed. The mothers, the dam side becomes the dominant factor. And really you want to be on the other side because you can affect the quality of your product a lot better by bull selection. So we have a closed herd and we raise our own bulls right now. We have semen from a bull called Thumbs Up, which was, he's dead now, but we still have some of his semen out of New Zealand. But this shows where we went out, we made a little corral because you have to bring the cattle home. Nobody lives there. This is not the home place. There is no barn. We actually planted a tree line down the center, used Ostras, fast-growing poplar variety. In about 3 years, you've got shade, you've got windbreak. But see that weed patch there? We summer calf. And the calves are looking for places to get away from the flies. So give them some place to hide. Now, it doesn't look very good. It's not clean mowed or anything like that. But the calves are happy, and it works pretty well. There's water over on the left. We have four different locations. Yeah, we have cattle in 4 different locations. Now that can be a problem, and you use up a lot of time and effort just doing chores every day. We used to have people living at 3 of those locations, and now we're only at 2 of those locations. You have to think about your time and effort, how much you're going to put into this process and what the cost-benefit ratio actually is. Do you have the labor to do it, or are you going to have to get somebody else to help you? Can you do it yourself? Do you have extra time? Or are you just bored? it's the best place I know and the easiest way I know to let employees be a part of the process, part of the operation, start developing equity in a system. Because you can count numbers. So many head of chickens, so many head of porkers, so many cows. We actually tag them. They can go out there and they can say, those are mine. I have an employee that's been with me for about 19 years, and he has about 30% of the cow herd. We have roughly 300 head. And he gets a check almost every month of something that we've sold. And he makes most of the decisions on where the cow herd goes, what pasture we go in, things like that. But you're going to be involved with additional equipment. You're going to want a trailer, not like Sanford and Son. You may have to travel farther than he went anyway. We sell cattle wholesale mostly into the Chicago market. We're 250 miles away from Chicago. I'm 100 miles away from the only certified organic kill plant in the state of Illinois. We used to be certified as far as the cattle are concerned. We didn't certify immediately, and you'll find this probably with pork or with poultry or with lamb or with any of the other species. People aren't quite as concerned about the organic label as they are about how they were handled, how they were fed, how they were cared for, what they ate, things like that. And if they know that it's been on an organic operation and they've been raised in an organic fashion, that's good enough for them. The seal doesn't mean that much to them. The livestock certification and the pasture rule really benefits or involves dairy more than it does beef. And it really complicated the beef producers, and I don't know what it did to sheep and lambs so much, but might be the same rules. And we were spending an extra $1,000 a year just to be certified organic for the livestock herd. We didn't get them certified until 2004. But we had 10 water wells we had to test every year. And you have a piece of paper on every animal that you have. Well, my God, that's a lot of paperwork. We weren't getting paid for the trouble, so we decertified. That was almost as hard as certified. They don't trust you. Really. So we had to sign all kinds of papers that said that, no, we didn't sell this animal as certified organic. We put on the bill of lading, organically raised, forage fed completely. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that grass base. A lot of our private sales come from doctors, medical doctors, who told the patient, you need to eat organically raised meat that's been forage fed for the omega-3s. Let's go back to the equipment. If you're going to have to make hay for this group, or you're going to have to grind feed if it's hogs or poultry, and maybe you don't have that equipment or you didn't have it. Water distribution. Now, you've got water, but distributing it where you want it, the way you want it, that's a big deal for some folks. Topography is going to make a lot of difference on this. Some of you have natural farm ponds, collecting points. Don't let animals get in a farm pond. Just do not do that, ever. There's a pretty slick one over at near Macomb, Illinois. What was his name? Two T's. Can't think of his name. Anyway, he had some really rough ground, really rolling ground, and he had a lot of drainage that he could collect in farm ponds. And he poured concrete egresses into those ponds and then fenced them. So the cattle would go into those ponds and drink while standing on concrete, on solid ground. And they wouldn't stand around long enough if you had a whole herd to defecate or anything like that. I'm sure they did it one time or another, but it wouldn't be something where they'd stand in muck to try to stay cool on a hot day, or they wouldn't lie down in it if it got shallow along the edge, because that'll happen. And if you really want to see a mess, turn hogs into a situation like that. Because there have been people who said, my pond won't hold water. And the old timers say, well, drain the damn thing and turn the hogs in. And that's what you do. They'll seal a pond. They can seal a pond like that, but it makes a huge mess and you don't want them drinking it. We lost calves one time because we allowed cattle into a pond, and we had a calf die. It was about 3-4 months. Nah, it wasn't that old, maybe 3-4 weeks old. And then another. And finally we had a vet come out and post it, and it was clay particles, clay particulates that it was picking up in turbid water. Water needs to be clean. Now, Klaus, you're going to have to kick in here.
Okay.
Pasture and crop rotations, long versus short, and cover crops. Utilization of cover crops, probably not going to raise the whole animal. Now, Lauren was here early, and one of the most interesting things I've heard since, hey, this thing moves. You can't lean on this. Was putting corn in 60-inch rows and putting cover crops between it and turning in the sheep and raising the same yield of corn that you had in 30-inch rows. I thought, holy cow, that just blew my mind. I mean, we're all, you know, there's Mark sitting there going to 15-inch rows, and I'm thinking about doing the same thing. And I think, whoa, are we going the wrong direction? Now, if you're into no-till, I mean, you're a successful cash grain operator, and you're into no-till, but you want to maintain a cow herd or something that's on pasture, sheep, whatever, even pork, and to a lesser degree poultry, because they don't take quite the space. And you're going to till that soil, and you're going to do the least amount of damage to that soil. You're probably going to till it in late summer when the microbes aren't really very active. And you're going to do it as shallowly as you possibly can. And you're probably going to, if you're going to plant corn, you're probably going to plant oats and hairy vetch or some such, so that you can no-till into it the next spring. But you know what you've done? You've destroyed one of your pastures. So it's going to take extra land, if you're going to do the no-till, to have pasture in this incorporated system, because what are you going to do with that cow herd? So your rotation might go to 5 years instead of 4, just to do the same thing that you were doing with 4. That's why you have to think about this. Cover crops are pretty good, but they're probably going to be short-term instead of long-term. Grasses are going to give you more length. Argentinians, for years, didn't have access to fertilizer. You've all heard of the pampas and Argentine beef and how great it is, and I've been there, and it is. It's great. But they had a 12-year rotation. Corn, soybeans, small grain, pasture, 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 and on and on and on. That was their fertility. That's the way they did it. And if one of the interesting things about fertility, you think, well, you know, how much fertility do I get out of a cow or any animal, but a cow especially? And of course, we always have the methane argument. There's actually some literature out now that we should abandon livestock altogether, especially cattle, simply because of the methane problem. Well, I think they're taking all the data off of some feedlot somewhere. because they're not on, they couldn't be on grass and do this. But one of the things, it was on an industrial chemical magazine. It was kind of aimed at agriculture. This is years ago I read this, long before I was organic. And they were trying to tell us how that we needed micronutrients in the system. It's when micronutrients first became something that we started to talk about. You know, we need a little bit of zinc, we need a little bit of molybdenum, we need maybe some copper, you know, in our micronutrients to get maximum yields. And it went on for 2 or 3 pages in this magazine, slick papered magazine, all kinds of pretty pictures, but 2 or 3 pages of really complicated chemistry about chelates, if you understand what chelates are. And there was a little paragraph at the very end of it, and it said, however, you get the same thing out of cow manure. Really? I mean, then why would we not use it? So you have to think in terms of the length of time you're going to be on pasture. Now, we had this discussion last night, Klaus. I use the term, and it's been drilled into me, you're probably not going to build soil with just legumes or with some other plants. Grasses build soil, but Klaus, take over.
You need the diversity.
You need the diversity.
Yeah, and the other thing is when you're producing forages.
If you want to come up here where you can get on the mic, because I think this is important. This is really important, because if you're like me, you're in this game to build soil. You really want to build soil. We want to regenerate this system. And if we're going to have livestock and use livestock to do this, let's try to get it right.
The livestock actually create a way to use more species in your system.
Yeah.
So that there are crops that, and one thing I skipped over to mention with feeding livestock, the short-term crops, you can get there's a gene called BMR. And they've got it in Sudan sorghum, in Sudan grass. It's in corn. You can, I think there's sorghum lines with it, and millet. Now these are all extremely heat tolerant, drought tolerant crops that do natural tillage with their roots. The way to market all these crops is through cattle. But if you have the BMR gene, the cattle will get more feed value out of them. And if they're put up with the best methods we have available, they're actually higher in feed value than any of the grasses that we grow long term. So that you can fatten cattle or make milk on these short-term crops that also build soil, but they're using the resources during different times of the year when our normal pastures kind of go to sleep. I don't know about here, but in New York, our pastures they tank at the end of June. It gets too hot.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's been long-term studies showing extended pastures with annuals, with perennials, I'm sorry, versus short-term rye cover crop. Can you show me I just want to know if there's some data comparing those two, saying one builds soil better than the other. I just want to know.
Well, my thinking is the healthiest system is going to be a locally adapted system. You know, and the rye is going to work in some parts of some systems, but well, if you're far enough south, you're going to have a lot of times of the year when it's very hot, probably not quite enough water.
Okay. I'm in Iowa, so I'm just saying, and you're in Illinois, that's far here. I'm just saying, is there some actual data comparing long-term pastures to cereal rye building soil?
I don't think there's that much solid data.
I can give you some experience. And this is about potash. Okay, it used to be that the University of Illinois said we need to get all of our potash levels up to 300. Okay, then they dropped to 250. Then they dropped to 200, and now the potash is not you know, the reading's not valid.
We're talking soil health, we're not talking about
I understand.
how much nutrients are in the soil.
I understand. But the minute I tilled land and put it back into grass, up came the potash readings, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I agree. This is not necessarily all indicators of soil health, but on our response and integrated cropping systems trial focused on soil biology, what we're really, and Klaus mentioned this in his keynote, so much of resilience is equated with diversity. And if we have above ground diversity, which translates to below ground diversity, we have data. Leah was the person that did all these analyses. It's feeding a diverse microbial community. And that diverse microbial community leads to resilience in the system as we look at fluctuations. Because certain microbes are going to thrive better at certain temperatures, certain water, certain length, growing season. And that's going to help with, it comes from the ecology literature with redundancy and function. And that's going to help with resiliency. And I see Matt Liebman is more of an ecologist than I am, but talking to our ecologist that works in soil microbiology. So that data, I think, is strong and exists. So obviously, there's lots of different indicators of soil health. I think that the concept of building diversity in the system to more mimic our ecological systems, which are highly diverse, is going to build in that key aspect of resiliency. There is data on that aspect.
Yeah, actually, I think there's some confusion too. If you could make the argument that a permanent pasture builds more carbon, but if you're only going to eat meat, that might make sense. But most of this country eats things other than meat. So I think having the animals integrated onto the rest of the system makes a more complex and more robust system on a wider range of measures.
Not all pastures are created equal, too. So there's a lot of management issues with pasture and integrating diversity and making sure that it's being raised properly to foster that below ground biomass.
So our farm actually has 10 acres of permanent pasture, and it's on our best land. It's a floodplain of a stream. And by putting that permanent pasture on that floodplain, I'm harvesting all of our neighbors' upstream soil that they're losing. And to me, that's sustainability, because it's cleaning the water downstream. It's storing that lost soil, and it's sequestering a lot of carbon. But if that's the only thing I did, I would not be producing anywhere near as much food in my system as I do when I've got those cattle. Those 10 acres are managing 50 head. I graze 50 animal units, sometimes 60 or 70 on those 10 acres, because they're highly productive during May, highly productive into June, and then they tank. And then I have to supplement with things that grow better at the temperatures and conditions that I have. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's how do you combine all of your resources to get the most out of them. Is that?
Yeah, I think. But did we miss your point?
Yeah, kind of, but that's okay.
No, really. You were trying to get it. Do we gain? Where's the data for long-term?
Yeah, don't worry about it. I mean, I don't see any data anywhere.
Argentina is starting to plow up their pampas and do what we do.
Yeah, and using a plow is probably one of the worst things you can do. So, I mean, if you're going to use a plow, you're probably going to destroy your soil. Don't worry about it.
Actually, I would argue that the plow is not the worst tool you could use at all. Misusing the plow is the worst thing you could do. Misusing any other piece of tillage equipment can do the same damage or worse. A rotavator can destroy soil more efficiently than a plow can if you misuse it. So you can take any tool and misuse it and do damage with it. And you know, that's getting into the weeds a little, but.
Well, what type of species do you have on that pasture that's flooded every once in a while? What will survive there?
I've tried to maintain three different communities of species, and nature is confounding my efforts. On the highest ground, what seems to be surviving is fescue, bluegrass, and bird's foot trefoil mix. But Kentucky bluegrass seems to be, at least in New York, something that you find on limestone soils where there's a lot of moisture, and it's extremely productive at low temperatures. You know, during May, during June, into June, it's really productive. Orchard grass is probably more productive, but you have to reseed it fairly often. And I don't want to be reseeding. I don't want to be in that floodplain, tearing it up, doing tillage and reseeding. I want to have a natural system. If I stand there, I can probably count 30 species, you know, in any given spot. And I believe that nature is going to be selecting the species that fit that environment, and how I manage the grazing is actually going to be what determines what nature decides to put there. Something my father taught me many years ago, he was right on the Dutch border on the German side, and they had permanent pastures that were 200 years old. And he said that you should never touch one of these permanent pastures because it's a mature ecosystem that is built up to a high level of resilience. The problem comes when we seed a pasture. We have to decide, are we going to put the investment into letting nature take it to a sustainable, resilient state, or are we going to constantly tear it up and start over and start anew? Well, what I found was those pastures went through a life cycle. When they were seeded, they were highly productive. They declined for about 4 or 5 years, and then they started building up as they became a more sustained natural system.
Well, I mean, if you're plowing your soils, you probably are tearing them up.
Well, and how are you going to reseed a pasture without disturbing it?
You don't need a plow to reseed the pasture.
Well, I haven't seen a method that works.
Okay.
Well, that may bring us down to you know, all sustainability is local.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I had a discussion with a soil scientist, a very well-known one on this, and I told him, you show me you know how to grow crops on my land, and I'll use your theory, but your theories don't work on my soil. You know, that's kind of the definition of what's local.
Here's a porker eating an ear of I think open pollinated corn.
Yeah.
And there are several species out there, including, see the Canada thistle?
Yeah. That's good feed.
Yeah, good feed. And there's enough pasture out there that animal's not rooting, it's getting what it wants.
Yeah.
That's out here at Sun Prairie. That's on Sanford and Son. But here's what happens when you start to rotate a grass pasture, especially if there's a clump grass in it. Now this is one pass, or maybe two, no, I think two on the left, one on the right, of a high-speed disc, some of the newer high-speed discs, notch blades, one time over.
Inline. They're called inline discs.
Well, I don't know. This was a, what's the German version?
The Lumpkin.
Lumpkin?
Yeah, that's an inline disc.
Yeah,
right.
Inline, right. And how many more times are you going to have to run over that to get it where you can get those clumps through a rotary hoe if you're going to put a corn crop in it? That's one of the problems.
Yeah.
But that's what you're going to face if you're going through this kind of a rotation and using grasses, especially grasses that have good root systems that are contributing to soil health. And there's one of those dreaded tools. Now, that, if you look at the blades very closely, that has what we call an L blade on it. And you can till very shallowly, and you can cut that crown at about 2 inches.
Mm-hmm.
And you leave the hoods up, and you're not beating your soil to death, but you are cutting the crowns, and you're doing a minimum amount of tillage. That's what we found to be the least damaging, or what I think, to the soil. We've gone through offset discs and tandem discs and this other tool. And that happens to be along a ditch bank, plowing up where the turn rows were. But we went through a period of time where, my God, we thought we were disking 5 and 6 and 7 times just to get some of those root balls in shape. Mm-hmm. And the plow was simpler. And if you plowed shallowly, it wasn't too bad. but we don't, it's in the shed.
What is that? Is that a cavernolant?
That's a cavernolant.
So that plow is not really inverting. It's getting the top clean,
No.
but it's only setting the bottom on edge. That's a very different tool than that Iowa plow that people talk about that go 10 inches deep and flip it upside down.
No, this is a cavernolant plow. And even though you see the ground's a little rough there, but out in the middle of that field, it laid out pretty nicely.
And you're really not doing that much tillage.
No, not very
With
much.
that.
Sometimes that's the quickest way to get to where you want to go with the least amount of damage.
Yeah.
So, questions? Go ahead, Klaus, you have something to say.
Yeah, I would throw out this idea of succession, that if you can work with a natural succession,
Yeah,
there's a certain order that species really do well in. Like if you're going from a winter grain to clover, there is absolutely no reason to do tillage because the winter grain is creating the ideal environment for those clover seeds to sprout in and grow and thrive. If you let the clover go past a certain point, it's going to set you up for weeds. Because if it dies and the nitrogen mineralizes and there's nothing there to take it, there will be something there to take that nitrogen. And that's an area that we haven't gotten into, but I think it's pertinent to everything, is the timing of the mineralization, the timing of the biological activity has to coincide with the need for other crops to use those minerals.
we're establishing pastures mostly behind oats or a small grain, and we're overseeding usually in the spring. And we're using a mix of 25% orchard grass, 25% perennial ryegrass, 25% alfalfa, 25% red clover by seed count. By seed count. And if we plant oats in the spring, then the next day we're out there with an air seeder seeding the small seeds. Or if it's a rye field, we're doing it in the spring, but we have to go late enough that we won't kill the alfalfa. Now we'll do straight red clover frost seed, and we'll use an air seeder for that. It's an old style wheel rich, but basically you do right on the surface, and you don't care if the wind's blowing. You can get a good seed pattern, and it has counter rotating neoprene rollers that really handle the small seeds very accurately. So that works pretty well. But you really need to be very accurate. And then you're probably not going to turn anything out the first year because you want the grass to establish itself. The legumes will come on fine, but the cattle or any hoofed animal really tears up the young grass.
Do you harvest it and bale it?
We bale the stubble clover, especially oat stubble clover is pretty good hay for cattle, for cows, brood cows. Yeah,
Sure
oat stubble, it's some of our best hay. Rye stubble not as good. They just don't like it as well.
Do you have to deal with autopathy?
No, not so much.
Okay, that's an issue that we've run into. We have run into an issue called autopathy, where if you have an alfalfa field that runs out and want to go back to alfalfa, good luck.
Yeah.
Because the mature alfalfa will kill the seedling alfalfa. And you get situations that are not directly autopathy, but certain crops, you don't just go from that crop back to that crop without having some other.
We don't deal with it because we're rotating, so we don't.
Oh, so you don't have to.
We don't have it. We never have alfalfa that long. I had a thought that I wanted to. I lost it. It was really good too.
Jackie?
Yes.
I recall you were doing some experimental spring planting rye in soybeans.
Yes.
How did that work out? I mean, did that?
You mean companion seeding rye with soybeans?
Yeah, as a weed suppression, and then
Some years.
the rye died out after.
Yeah, some years I'm accused of using chemicals. And other years I'm accused of what the hell. I mean, I have diversity in my field, and it's called foxtail, and I mean a lot of diversity. But yeah, some years it works, and it's not foolproof. But I do it continuously. I think we'll get it. I mean, it works pretty well.
Yeah. There's another procedure that we've experimented with where when the soybeans are at yellow leaf. And we found that the timing is critical. You can throw any winter grain on a soybean field when you see the first yellow leaves, and it'll take. If you're a week ahead of that, it will fail. And I think it has to do with you've got the soil, the canopy is closed, and there's no sunlight. And if those seeds sprout and there's no sunlight, the soybeans finish them off. Mm-hmm. But if you catch them right at that stage when you see a yellow leaf about every 20 yards down the row, that's the condition in New York, then you can drop that seed, it'll start, the leaves from the soybeans will fall off almost in perfect time. The earthworms come up and consume the leaves in a matter of days. And I've had beautiful stands of winter grains. Just throwing that out. That's just broadcast, yes.
Yeah, we've flown on a hairy vetch on beans that are dropping leaves,
Yeah.
and not had quite as good a luck.
It depends. There's some luck, but the timing is really critical. Too early or too late.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah. Sometimes the season depends upon that.
Yeah.
Haven't had a lot of good luck putting rye into corn stalks by air. I used a broadcast seeder behind the cultivator, done it on second pass cultivation in corn. Haven't had a lot of good luck with that. What we have had a lot of good luck with is broadcasting rye on corn stalks, just going out there with the fertilizer spreader and broadcasting rye, and turn the cows out. Mm-hmm. And you know, they pug it in, they do the cultivation. You think, I'm going to kill the rye. No, you don't.
That helps it.
No, and leave them there all winter, and by spring that rye is growing up and they're eating rye.
Yeah, and they're fertilizing it.
And they're fertilizing it.
But they're eating a lot of corn.
Yeah, all the same time.
There was some interesting research out of University of Minnesota, Brad Hines, that showed that they did actually taste tests, and Kathleen Della from Iowa was involved in this, that grazing beef cows on rye actually changed the flavor of the meat. The consumers could tell the difference. Whether or not it would be enough that they would dislike it, but it was just interesting that rye seemed to impact the flavor of the product.
Well, I've also heard that, well, I think that this is really true, that fescue, if you're finishing steers or heifers on fescue, it's probably a mistake. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it gets a metal taste.
If it has the endophyte.
Yeah. Well,
but you can get no endophyte.
Yeah, it doesn't produce nearly as well as the old Kentucky 31, but I've never planted a fescue seed in my life, and I have it all over the farm.
Yeah, it comes in by itself.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting dilemma for us organic purists. There is an endophyte and a fescue at the Noble Institute turned out, which has a gene deleted for the toxic factor, and this fescue doesn't have that toxic factor for cattle, and they perform better on it. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't have the endophyte, the plant is weak.
Yeah.
But this endophyte has just been altered to take out the toxin.
Good.
Now, that could be construed as genetic engineering. That could be a really interesting discussion. Is this something okay to use or isn't it?
Yeah.
They developed that by breeding, though. They didn't modify the genes like Monsanto.
Well, they actually deleted one gene. You can't tell. You can go into the genome, there's no sign of it, but they took one gene out.
Not by breeding?
No, it is breeding, but they took one gene out. That was a gene deletion.
The natural selection.
The way they got the gene out was a type of CRISPR. So, and I'm just throwing that out to be provocative because it's a really interesting question that I don't have the answer.
I didn't.
But I've always said that technology is neutral and that how it's used determines whether it's good or bad. You know, that's the same with these tools.
Yeah.
You know, the tool is neutral. If you misuse it, it's doing harm. If you apply that to some of these genetic technologies, you know, what about genomics where you can tell, or marker-assisted breeding, mm-hmm. you know, where you can use genetic engineering tools to tell immediately which seeds have the gene trait you want. But it gets really down to a fine edge when you're using it on something like this, which is really in keeping with what we like, but it's outside of the definition.
know the Great Harvest guys have put a big presentation in NOP about using CRISPR.
Okay.
I don't know if there's ever been a decision on that.
I don't think there is.
I don't think there has, and from what I've learned, nobody has ever had stronger opinions on a technology that they knew very little about than CRISPR, because it's actually many different technologies that are all kind of lumped off and called the same thing, but they use different techniques. I didn't want to change the subject, but I thought that was an interesting lead-in for
Happy hour?
I wanted to throw out one other provocative thing. This was our chef friend, Dan Barber. When he had the Farm Foundation over, instead of steak, he was serving beet steaks, but he also had a salad made out of rye. So we were eating what the cows eat.
Wow.
And it actually tasted good.
Okay.